Hey church, well, welcome to our 5 p.m. service. We are so stoked that you've joined us online tonight. And if it's your first time with us, well, you have come at a great time because we are kicking off a brand new series on relationships called Real Talk. Now, I know times are a little bit uncertain at the moment, but one thing that does seem pretty certain to me is that God is doing something special in our relationships. You know, I was doing some scientific research the other week, and by that I mean I was on an Instagram poll, but someone pretty prominent had asked a question to their followers that I found pretty interesting. And they had asked the question, in this time in my relationships I am experiencing, and the first answer people could vote for was quite distant, and the second answer people could vote for was deeper connection. And I don't think it would actually surprise that many of us to find out that around 71% of people at the 24-hour mark had voted for deeper connection. You know, it's interesting that in a time where we can't physically be together in the same way, people are actually saying they're experiencing a level of care and support that is making them feel closer than ever. And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that maybe that's not so surprising after all. And maybe this time is actually tapping into something about our relationships that the Bible has really been teaching us this whole time. That the quality of our connections and the quality of the relationships around us are actually less defined by our physical proximity and much more defined by the posture that we have towards one another and the attitude of our heart. And so with that in mind, tonight I've titled my message, The Lowdown on Love. If you have your Bibles with you, wherever you are, you can jump to the verse that we're looking at tonight, which is found in the book of Luke, chapter 22, verses 24 to 27. And just to set the scene a little bit, this is taking place at the Last Supper. So what we're picturing right now is we're picturing Jesus at a table with his disciples. And it's obviously going pretty well when we pick it up in verse 24. The disciples bickered over which one of them would be considered the greatest in the kingdom. Now, they're not talking about a worldly kingdom, they're talking about the kingdom Jesus came to establish. And then it says Jesus interrupted their argument, saying the kings and men of authority in this world rule oppressively over their subjects, claiming that they do it for the good of the people. They are obsessed with how others see them. But this is not your calling. You will lead by a different model. The greatest one among you will live as the one called to serve others without honor. The greatest honor and authority is reserved for the one who has a servant heart. The leaders who are served are the most important in your eyes, but in the kingdom, in my kingdom, it is the servants who lead. Am I not here as one who serves you? You know what I find both insane and a little bit amusing about this story is that at this point in time, the disciples really should have been more united than anyone. On paper, they ticked all of the boxes for things that are supposed to bring people together. They'd all left everything that they had to follow Jesus. They'd shared experiences and adventure. They'd shared pain. They'd shared joy. They shared a savior. And right now, they were even sharing a meal, which is like the perfect picture for connection. And yet, what does the Bible say that they're doing in this moment? Bickering. You see, one of the greatest truths we can sometimes miss is that just because we're living in close proximity, just because we have relationships in our life, it doesn't mean that we're not still living with a spirit of division. Sitting at the same table, but bickering. Part of a new kingdom, but still trying to carry an old culture. I used to read this verse and think the disciples were absolute idiots. But now I realize that those guys are us. You see, when the Bible repeats something, it's probably something we're going to need reminding of once or twice in our life. And not carrying the culture around us into our relationships is something that we see over and over again. Because you see, if we want to be followers of Christ, then our relationships can't look like everybody else's. If I could speak one thing into relationships right now, it would be this. Please do not let the world around you inject you with an idea that's called individualism. It is an approach to relationships that begins by asking this question: How do you benefit me? It's the type of approach to relationships that wants relationships on its own terms. It evaluates and measures people. It judges and critiques people. It weighs relationships down with expectations that they'll never be able to meet. It attaches our agenda to relationships. It treats others like obstacles. And worst of all, and I see this all the time, it will preach division as if it is an empowering personal choice. Forget about them. Pave your own way. Someone offends us, see you later. Someone's behaving in a way we don't really like, they're cancelled. Someone doesn't share the same views as us about something, not worth my time. Someone has interests that we don't like. Well, we're just not on the same level. And while we're at it, we can find ourselves unintentionally almost cutting off anyone that's ever done one of the following. Talked behind our back, not invited us somewhere, said something we didn't like, forgotten our birthday, not paid us back, borrowed our clothes, eaten our food, cancelled plans, ditched us for date night, hasn't texted or called us back when they should have, and then we look up and we say, whoops. Because we've accidentally just put ourselves in isolation. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for Jesus to interrupt the argument. And I'm ready for a new lowdown on love. You see, Jesus says the same thing to us today that he said to the disciples back then. This is not your calling. You are to lead by a different model. If you want the lowdown on love, here it is. Get low, get down. Think about the greatest form of service you possibly can and go do that for other people. Count others as more significant than yourself. Forgive and let it cost you something. Don't pave your own way, but have the integrity and the strength to stand by each other and stay by each other when things get hard. Have hard conversations for the sake of moving forward, and out of everything available to you in this world, deem right relationship with God and right relationship with one another worthy of your total pursuit. That's the lowdown on love. And we might think that maybe that's a radical or impossible idea. But Jesus tells us exactly how living like this is possible when he says these words. Am I not here as one who serves you? You know, we can kind of gloss over the importance of what he's saying here or miss the significance, but Jesus shows us just how serious he was about this on the very same night as it's recorded in the book of John 13. Where he gives his disciples an example of what it literally means to get low and to get down, and he begins to wash their feet. And their feet back then were like 10 times worse than what our feet are like now. And he gets to his disciple, Peter. And Peter's still stuck in this old mindset of hierarchy and self-importance. And Peter kind of attempts to be humble, and he's like, no, Lord, I'm not going to let you wash my feet. And Jesus looks at him. And he says, Peter, if you don't let me wash your feet, you'll have no place with me. You see, Jesus was showing them something a little bit deeper than an example here. He was showing them a truth, that the way we love others will always look like the way we're allowing God to love us. The Bible teaches us in 1 John 4:7 that all love comes from God. You know, when we see sort of broken and fragmented relationships, it's really easy to try and, blame other things, to try and blame external things, like maybe it's the age of social media we're in that's made it hard, or maybe it's the busy and fast-paced nature of our culture, or we blame things that we feel like we can't control, like I'm just not an extrovert, or I don't do good with small talk. I'm just not wired or in a way where it's easy to connect. And you see, what the Bible does in 1 John 4:7 is it kind of shuts all of that down. And it says, well, actually, love doesn't flow from those places. Love ultimately flows from God. And so the way we're treating one another will look like a reflection of our relationship with God. You know, this is something I learnt about in my life when I was in a bit of a crossroads moment in one of my friendships. One of those moments where you have to decide which lowdown on love you're going to buy into. And you know, we kind of have these phases in our relationships that we go through. We have the honeymoon phase, which everyone's familiar with, where we meet someone and they're the best thing ever. And then we hit stage 2 where we find out something that's not so great. Like maybe they like pineapple on their pizza, or maybe they watch cricket for fun. But we get through that because, you know, it's all right. And then we hit stage 3. And we will always hit stage 3 in our relationships because no matter how hard we try, we will never get it 100% right. What stage 3 reflects is the 100% guarantee that we are going to hurt and offend each other at some point. And this is why we need to understand that forgiveness is such an important part of the posture that we're called to adopt in our relationships. And I'm not talking about the world's version of forgiveness, which is like a magical fairy dust that we throw in the air. We just speak it out and everything's all good. But the Bible likens forgiveness to a debt, which means what we're actually saying when we're saying, I forgive you, is we're saying, I'm not going to try and extract payment from you. I'm not going to gossip about you. I'm not going to promote my pain so that others think less of you. I'm not going to hold this against you and expect you to make it up to me. And I'm not going to bring it up in 12 months' time and try and charge you interest. And it's not always easy. And in this relationship at this point in time, I was experiencing that. It was my turn to be offended and hurt. And so I did the good Christian thing and totally cut this person out of my life. And every time I would try and spend time with God in prayer, I remember there was like this nagging in my spirit that something was off, that I wasn't standing up straight. I wasn't adopting the posture I was called to adopt in that relationship. And it got to me one day where I just snapped in prayer and I was like, God, I don't think you understand. And so I started laying out my case before God that I had been building in my mental courtroom against this person for so long. And I used to think my argument was pretty clever. But now I realize that it could probably be summed up in 3 words. But I'm right. It took me the longest time to realize that I was answering a question that God had never asked of me. You see, God doesn't ask us if we're right. God asks us, even if we are right, will we get low? And will we love people anyway? Will we go to a hidden place and give God our anger and give God our frustration and allow Him to step into that place and to heal so that we are freed to love others with the type of fearlessness and the type of confidence that can only come when we know there is nothing they can take from us that we haven't been positioned by our relationship with God to give freely. The way we love others will always reflect how we let God love us. And you know, the world doesn't need us to pretend that it's easy. The world doesn't need us to secretly hate each other but know that we shouldn't. So we're posting on Instagram and we're captioning it, just out here living that 1 Corinthians 13 type of love, 24/7 patient, 24/7 kind. But they know pretty darn well that 2 days ago we weren't speaking to each other. What they do need to see in our relationships is that there is a love we have access to in this life that has the power to interrupt the argument, that has the power to break down barriers and establish a community that stays through the type of posture that puts everything into perspective. Only in Jesus do we find that type of love. Only in Jesus do we find a love that takes a group of people who are just bickering about honor and power and wealth and turns them into people that are suddenly going out and establishing relationship by loving and serving people, even if it kills them. Only in Jesus do we find the type of love that takes someone like Simon the Zealot, which was almost like a political party that hated tax collectors, and Matthew the tax collector, and puts them on the same team. Imagine that today, 2 ends of an extreme coming together in unity. Well, we can't imagine that because Jesus is alive and that love is still available. the type of love that covers a multitude of sins, the type of love that establishes an eternal hope in our hearts, and the type of love that will always choose relationship because it will always choose us.